The Battle of Clontarf was a battle that took place on 23 April 1014 at Clontarf, near Dublin, on the east coast of Ireland. It pitted the forces of Brian Boru, High King of Ireland, against a Norse-Irish alliance comprising the forces of Sigtrygg Silkbeard, King of Dublin, Maelmorda mac Murchada, King of Leinster, and a Viking contingent led by Sigurd of Orkney and Brodir of Man. It lasted from sunrise to sunset, and ended in a rout of the Viking and Leinster forces. It is estimated that between 7,000 and 10,000 men were killed. Although Brian's forces were victorious, Brian himself was killed, as were his son Murchad and his grandson Twadalbach. Leinster King Maelmorda and Viking leaders Sigurd and Brodir were also slain. After the battle, the Vikings of Dublin were reduced to a secondary power. Brian's family was temporarily eclipsed, and there was no undisputed High King of Ireland until the late 12th century. The battle was an important event in Irish history and is recorded in both Irish and Norse chronicles. In Ireland, the battle came to be seen as an event that freed the Irish from foreign domination, and Brian was hailed as a national hero. This view was especially popular during English and British rule in Ireland. Although the battle is today viewed in a more critical light, it still has a hold on popular imagination. Background: the Vikings began carrying out raids on Gaelic Ireland in the late 8th century, and over the following few decades they founded a number of settlements along the coast. Vikings first established themselves in Dublin in 838, when they built a fortified area, or Longfort, there. During the 10th century, Viking Dublin developed into the Kingdom of Dublin, a thriving town and a large area of the surrounding countryside, whose rulers controlled extensive territories in the Irish Sea and, at one time, York. Over time, many Vikings were assimilated into Gaelic society and became the Norse Gaels. Dublin was closely involved in the affairs of the Kingdom of the Isles, which included the Isle of Man and the Hebrides. And when the Dublin king Amlabh Cuarang was defeated by Mael Secnal mac Domnall at the Battle of Tara in 980, he was supported by the men of the Isles. Amlabh's son, Sigtrygg Silkbeard, who was king of Dublin from 990, allied himself with his uncle Maelmorda mac Murchada, king of Leinster. They met Mael Secnal and Brian Boru at the Battle of Glenmama in 999, where they were defeated. From the time of the 7th century and the reign of Domnall mac Edo, the kingship of Tara was a title which was strongly associated with the High Kingship of Ireland and was held by members of the Uí Cútail dynasty, who controlled the northern half of Ireland. In the 10th century, the Dalgacais, until then a small kingdom in what is now County Clare, began to expand. By the time of his death in 951, Seneteg mac Lorcain had become king of Thomond. His son, Mathgay Main mac Seneteg, was king of Munster when he died in 976. Mathgay Main's brother, Brian Boru, quickly asserted his claim to the kingship of Munster, then invaded Leinster and gained its submission. In 998 he attacked the Uí Cútail stronghold of Meath. Mael Secnal responded by attacking Munster in 999, and over the following years the two kings struggled for supremacy in Ireland. In 997, Brian and Mael Secnal met in Clonfert and reached an agreement where they recognized each other's reign over their respective halves of the country, Mael Secnal in the north and Brian in the south. Brian received the hostages of Leinster and Dublin from Mael Secnal, and surrendered the hostages of Connacht to him. The peace was short-lived. After they had jointly defeated the Vikings at Glenmama, Brian resumed his attacks on Mael Secnal. He marched on Tara in 1000 with the combined armies of Munster, Osriga, Leinster and Dublin. But after an advance party consisting of the latter two groups was destroyed by Mael Secnal, Brian Boru withdrew from the area without giving battle. In 1002 he marched with the same army to Athlone, and took the hostages of Connacht and Meath. He was now the undisputed High King of Ireland. revolt of Dublin and Leinster. Brian consolidated his hold on Ireland by eventually obtaining the submission of the Northern Territories of Cene, Acutel Neogain, Cene, Acutel Conail and Ulaid. Following a series of circuits of the northern part of the island, he completed the task when, following a great hosting, by land and sea, into the Uene Acutel territory of Cene, Acutel Conail in 1011. The king was brought south to Dalgacai's territory to submit to Brian Boru in person at his royal site of Sencorad. It was not long, however, before fighting was renewed. Flathbatach Uane Acutil, king of the Cene Acutel Neogain, resented the rise of Brian Boru. Had the old political order persisted, Flathbatach would have been in line to succeed to the high kingship. He attacked his Cene Acutel Conail neighbours in 1012, but, while doing so, Mael Sechnal attacked the Cene Acutel Neogain inauguration site of Chula Hodja. Flathbatach in turn raided Meath the following year and Mael Sechnal was forced to back down. Sigtryg and Maelmorda took advantage, and themselves raided Meath. Mael Sechnal sent his army to raid the hinterland north of Dublin as far as Howth, but he was defeated. He lost 200 men including his son Flann. Sigtryg then sent a fleet along the coast to attack the Munster town of Cork, but that was defeated, and Sigtryg's nephew was killed. A full-scale conflict was inevitable. Brian brought his army to Leinster in 1013, and camped outside Dublin from September until the end of the year. Sigtryg went overseas in search of Viking support and enlisted the help of Sigurd Lord Vierson, the Earl of Orkney and Brodir, a warrior of the Isle of Man. According to the Icelandic Njal saga, Sigtryg promised both men the kingship of Ireland if they defeated Brian. In early 1014, Sven Falkbeard, king of Denmark, had invaded and become the first Norse king of England. The Viking fleets of Orkney and Man sailed into Dublin in Holy Week 1014. Brian mustered the army of Munster, which was joined by Mael Sechnal and two Connacht kings, Mael Ruinade Ua Hydeen, king of Uí Crachadna, and Tadhg Ua Selai, king of Uí Main, and marched on Dublin. Battle. No order of battle is given in the contemporary sources. The only leaders named are those who died in the battle. The nearest contemporary accounts are the Annals of Innisfallen and the Annals of Ulster. Among the fallen on Brian's side, they name the High King himself, his son Murchid and his grandson Twadlebach, as well as his nephew Conaring. Domnall Mac Diarmatar of Cork Ubay Sind, Mac Bethard Mac Muracheg of Charig Iluishra, Mael Ruinade Ua Hydeen of Uí Crachadna, and Tadhg Ua Selai of Uí Main. On the opposing side are named Maelmorda, Dubgul Mac Amley, Gilitarain Mac Glun Sigurd Lord Vierson of Orkney, and Brodir, commander of the Viking fleet. No notables from Meath are recorded among the slain, leading to the suggestion that, if present, Mael Sechnal kept to himself and his forces out of harm's way. But the Annals of Ulster say that Mael Sechnal and Brian rode together to Dublin, and the Annals of the Four Masters go so far as to say that it was Mael Sechnal who won the day, and completed the rout after the death of Brian. On the other hand, Cogad Gadel Regalib says that the men of Meath came to the muster with Brian, but were not faithful to him. According to the Cogad, after his arrival at Dublin, Brian sent his forces north across the river to plunder the area known as Fine Gaul, and they torched the country as far as Howth. Brian, now in his 70s, did not go with them but stayed behind to pray. The Dublin forces set out by land, and were joined in Clontarf at high tide by the Viking fleet that was in Dublin Bay. The front line of the Dublin, Leinster forces were the foreign Vikings, led by Brodir, Sigurd and a man called Platt, described as the bravest knight of all the foreigners. Behind them were the men of Dublin, commanded by Dubgul Mac Amley and Gilitarain Mac Glun. Behind them again came the Leinster men, headed by Maelmorda. Sigtryg remained in Dublin with enough men to defend it, should the battle go against him. He watched the battle from the walls with his wife slain, the daughter of Brian. At the front of Brian's forces were the Dalgcais, led by Brian's son Murchad, Murchad's 15-year-old son Twadlbach, Brian's brother Cudulai and Domnall mac Diarmatar of Porcubasund. Behind them were the other forces of Munster, commanded by Muddler mac Domnall mac Fiellan, king of the Diarcutis Muman, and Magnus mac Amchadda, king of Uiliathane. Next came the Connacht, led by Mael Ruinade Ua Hydeen and Tadhgua Selai. To one side of them were Brian's Viking allies, Fergal Ua Ruach, with the Uri Brilwin, and the Conwerkna was placed on the left flank. After the Connacht came Mael Secnal and the men of Meath, but he had made an agreement with the men of Dublin that if he would not attack them, they would not attack him. The battle opened with Platt taunting Domnall mac Imene, a Scottish ally of Brian. The two men marched out into the middle of the field and fought, and both died, with the sword of each through the heart of the other, and the hair of each in the clenched hand of the other. Then the battle proper got underway. It is described in the Cogged as remarkably loud and bloody. The men of Connacht fought the men of Dublin, and the fighting was so fierce that only 100 Connachtmen and 20 Dublinmen survived. The last casualties occurred at Dubgall's Bridge, which Sean Duffy suggests was a bridge over the River Tolka, on the road back to Dublin. Brian's son Murchad, at the head of the Dalgcais army, took on the foreign Vikings and, according to the Cogged, he himself killed 100 of the enemy, 50 with the sword in his right hand and 50 with the sword in his left. The Vikings wore mail, the Irish did not. Yet the Irish gained the advantage, partly through the use of small spears, which they hurled at the enemy, and partly through numerical superiority. The battle, which had begun at first light, lasted all day. Eventually, the Dublin-Leinster forces broke, and some withdrew towards their ships, while others made for a nearby wood. However, the tide had come in again, cutting off the passage to the wood, but also carrying off the Viking ships. With no way out, they were killed in large numbers, many of them by drowning. Samuel Houghton, in 1860, calculated that the tide at Clontarf would have been high at 5:30 a.m. and again at 5:55 p.m., which is consistent with the account in the Cogged. It was at this point that Brian's grandson Twadlbach was killed. He pursued the enemy into the sea, but was hit by a wave and thrown up against the weir, and drowned. Murchad killed Sigurd, the Earl of Orkney, but shortly afterwards he himself was killed. Brian was in his tent praying when Brodir found him, and killed him. Brodir himself was then killed. Aftermath. Brian's body was brought to Swords, north of Dublin. There it was met by the Corb of Patrick, the traditional head of the church in Ireland, who brought the body back with him to Armagh, where it was interred after 12 days of mourning. Along with Brian were the body of Murchad and the heads of Cona, Brian's nephew, and Muddler, king of the Diarcutis Muman. Mael Secnal was restored as High King of Ireland, and remained secure in his position until his death in 1022. Though the annals imply that life was not much changed after the death of Brian Boru, it created a succession crisis, as Brian's son and heir Murchad had died as well. Brian had two remaining sons who could challenge for the kingship. Donchad mac Brian, his son with Gormflaith in Tadc mac Brian, his son with Eicraid. According to the annals, Donchad rallied the forces of the Dalgcais at Clontarf and led them home to Sencorad. Within weeks the Dalgcais, under the new leadership of Donchad, were battling their old masters the Eogannacht Raidland. Tadc initially joined his brother against the Eogannacht, but would eventually be killed in 1023 at the order of Donchad. Sigtryg remained king of Dublin until 1036, and was apparently secure enough to go on pilgrimage to Rome in 1028. However, after Clontarf, Dublin had been reduced to a lesser power. In 1052, Diarmait mac Mael na Mabo, King of Leinster, captured Dublin and Fine Gael, for the first time asserting Irish overlordship over the Norse of Ireland.